Well, welcome everyone for coming to our Lunch and Learn on PolicyMap beta version. I am Megan Dorito, and I'm really excited to be presenting this. So again, this workshop is being recorded. By continuing to be in the workshop, you are consenting to be recorded. So PolicyMap is a great resource, and about a month ago, they just updated their resource, which is really great because it allows more customization, as you can see with this layers. It used to be that you could only do a maximum of 3 layers. Now we can do up to 5 layers. They're higher resolution exports. You can zoom in even closer. And they also have icons, which is really great. Still to come, I do want to let you guys know about this, is that right now you cannot save your data. You can't download the full files, although you can still download small sections of it. And because you can't save it, you can't upload it later on. These will, however, all be coming out hopefully soon, features. And I will go ahead and go to our library website. Because let's face it, the first step of using any resource is how do you get to the resource? The easiest way is to scroll down to databases under quick links. And of course, all of our resources are alphabetically listed. So here we go, PolicyMap. I'm going to go ahead and sign in. Send me a push. Go. I do recommend that every time you access PolicyMap through the library website, because there is a free version of it, but it's not as in-depth as everything you can get from the version that we provide at PCOM. So you start with a very basic map zoomed out, and you can go ahead and start with any area you want. You can, I'm just going to go ahead and run through a few of these features. You can look at the maps in different lightings. You can look at it by terrain, by satellite. I'm just going to go ahead and point out that when you're zoomed in, you have the option to personalize it. So if you don't want to look at things like road labels, cities, names, you can turn these off. I personally like the terrain one best. And I'm going to go ahead and let's go ahead and look at good old Atlanta, which at least gives us a zoom in very quickly. I'm going to click off of that. And you can see it outlines the borders of Atlanta for you. I'm actually just going to click out of that because I'm going to say that theoretically we have a research project and we want to know for a study where we can find people who are 65 or older with disabilities, who might have diabetes, and see really what areas in Atlanta are most needy about that. So let's get started. The default layer is actually to just look at one single layer, as you can see right here. I'm going to go ahead and click on multi-layer because I want multiple layers for this. And let's go ahead and get started. So it starts with all these pull-down menus, as you can see here. And I'm just going to go ahead and start plugging some in. So I did say I wanted people who are 65 or older. So automatically, because I just have one layer in here, everything is purple, but it's also purple because it's estimated percent of people 65 or older, but notice that it's 0 to 100%. So say I want areas that have at least 40% people who are older than 65 with a disability. So now you can see if you click on a specific region, it will now tell you that 50% of this area are at least 65 with some sort of disability. But let's go ahead and add another factor in here. So let's see, let's go ahead and go to income. And I'm going to say people in poverty. And let's say I wanted to know very specific people or veterans, because theoretically I wanted to work, I wanted to work with veterans. Now, let's look at this chart here. We can see that our chart here only gives us a very small sliver, which is not surprising. But if I wanted, say, even areas that have at least 1% of people with disabilities. Okay. And so now all these purple sections, these are areas that have both. And if you notice, if I click on them, they give me both statistic layers, as opposed to when the first time we clicked on it, it was just one. I'm going to go ahead and add in a few more factors. Like, I want to know, where are the hospitals for all of these locations? So I can put in all these points here, and I can now see where the hospitals are. So here, this is orange. It's a little hard to see. So I can filter this, though. I can say, I actually want my hospitals to be red. There we go. Now my hospitals are red. They stand out a little bit more. Zoom out a little bit so I can continue to see all these little spots here. Okay. I'm going to say that I also wanted to know quality of life. Where are all the grocery stores? Let's go to food access, because I want to know if they live in food deserts and if they have easy access to things. And again, the default icon is orange. I'm going to make it blue so it stands out a little bit more, because our highways are kind of that orange color. Another thing I can do is, if you look at these, some of these, well, yeah, here we go, Family Dollar. Family Dollar is not what I would call a full grocery store. So you can actually look at these filters and say, I want a full service grocery store. And it'll take away all those Dollar Generals, because after all, you can't get a full, you can't get all your fruits and veggies probably from a dollar store. And let's say I also wanted to look at quality of life. I want to look at transportation, public transportation to be specific. So I want to know areas that people who have disabilities, who are older, might struggle to find transportation. So, okay, let's see. Right now, again, I fiddled with my map statistics. So right now it's at 3 miles, which is a fair distance to walk if you are disabled. And again, if you click on the remaining purple spots, it'll say distance to closest rail stop is, in this case, our value is 4.12 miles. So I'm just going to click in the Forest Park here. This little section of area here, it looks like, I guess we do have a hospital over here. But so here is a specific area that I've now identified that doesn't really have a close hospital nearby. They might struggle with getting transportation, because I did filter this by poverty levels as well as by disabilities. So here I've now identified a few areas in Atlanta where the need is greater. Oops, I'm sorry. Drag and drop can be a little sensitive. And one nice thing, I'm just going to zoom in on this Forest Park area again, is I can now click on Get Reports. And you can see there are multiple types of reports you can, but I'm going to go ahead and click on Community Profile. And it's loading. It gives me all sorts of reports about this specific community. It tells me the racial characteristics. It tells me the age distribution. It tells me average income, immigration level, all sorts of very useful bits of data. And I can just say that if you're looking to go into residency, if you have a specific interest in mind, this could be extremely useful for you because you could look at a specific area, see what are the specific needs. So say you wanted to go into cardiology. Well, I'm just going to go ahead and click Go Back, Return to Map. If you are going into this, you could look at health conditions, you could look at chronic conditions, that heart disease, etc. Really, one of the best ways to get started with this program is literally just to start clicking through the options here, because it really gives quite, it's very interesting what you can find. For example, under lending, we discovered that you can actually look at the red line from 1940. And then say you wanted to do some sort of comparison and you wanted to see, does this redlining still affect Atlanta today? And you could look at all sorts of maps on top of this. Anyway, one other thing to consider is if you decide you don't want to look at something, for example, I don't want to, you can click on the X right there, which takes us back to our original. I will say one thing to keep in mind is that you do have to have a certain level of zoom to use the multi-layer. Say I wanted to look at a national level. You can click on single layer and it asks you what percentage, or I'm sorry, which filter do you want to look at? And say I wanted to look at this, this first one. I'm going to go ahead and continue zooming out until I can look at it at a national level. And because this is extremely distracting, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of my points here. Now, as you can see here, there's still a very broad range of purples here. But one thing you can do when you're working with just one is I can actually change what my ranges are. So say I wanted my range to be actually areas which have, I'm going to say extreme. So 60, roughly 60%. And you can be very precise with this if you click on it. And let's say this is now going to be 50%, 40%, and 30%. So now the map I'm looking at is very different because I can see very precisely the statistics. And again, if you hover over this, you can see the specific data. You can go to reports, you can download this, you can do clips, all sorts of fun things. One thing to also keep in mind is, again, where's the data coming from? So every time you look at this, your filters, it will always tell you a specific source. In this case, it came from the census, and you can change what time period you go to. Keep in mind that a lot of times if you change it, I've now lost the custom filters I just did. So sometimes if you change it, Okay. You're going to go ahead and lose your filters, but that's always changeable. Let's see. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and ask, do I have any questions in the chat box? Okay, I'm not seeing any questions in the chat box. I do want to also mention that, let's click away from that. Right now, the full download feature is only available in Legacy, but you can export your work as an image, which you can do. And, there's some variance in there. It may take several images. It does happen. PolicyMap, in addition, also invites people to feel free to incorporate PolicyMap. They just ask that you cite them. It also asks you can create a specific link, which is coming soon, but hopefully will be available soon. The embedding feature is currently available. And when I say coming soon, they've been pretty fast to roll it out. So I'm hoping within the next month or two that all these features will become available, because as far as I can tell from digging into PolicyMap, the only features left are the linking, the saving, and the full downloads. Okay. That is, I basically just wanted to give you guys an idea of the ability that PolicyMap can do. Again, it can be an extremely valuable tool. I know I actually use this specifically because I was looking to hypothetically move areas, and I wanted to see if I moved, what's the housing situation like? What's the education like in the area that I was looking at? What's the quality of life? And you can layer all these features until you have very specific areas that you're looking at. And it's a great visual representation of wherever you want to do. And again, you can narrow it down by this. And even just looking at this, you can just go ahead and get all sorts of reports, which I have already mentioned. Okay. I am going to go ahead and, oops, I did not mean to stop sharing my screen. Let me share it again. I meant to change screens. To go back to my PowerPoint. PolicyMap does offer more training, which actually, let me go back to my website. Oh, that's right. I wanted to save that, and it just popped up. If you go to support, they have their video gallery. They also have their training calendar, all sorts of fun things. I think I already mentioned the citations, right? So I have already mentioned citations, feedback. So I will ask everyone to fill out a survey to help us improve our work. I do want to mention that our next Lunch and Learn is How to Write an Abstract by Kevin, which will be awesome. Let me go ahead and put the survey in the chat box. And again, I wanted to ask, does anyone have any questions? Okay.
Hi, I have a quick question.
Sure.
I came a little late. I apologize. Will you please, do you have time to go over how do you access this tool?
Sure. That's the nice thing about finishing a little early is I do have time.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and go back to the beginning. So easiest way is to library.pcom.edu, click on databases, and you can either type it in here, or I'm just going to go ahead and click on P and scroll down. And right now it's our single sign-on, which goes, oops, that's interesting. I didn't know that you clicked on this PCOM icon, it takes you back to libraries that tell you live and learn. I will say, the way it worked with Legacy is that you can actually see I have my own individual account here, which allowed me to save my work. And I'm hoping that this is going to be the exact same way it's going to work when beta catches up. Did that answer your question?
Yes, it did. Thank you so much. This is really from the presentation I saw. This is really a powerful tool. This really will be helpful, especially on rotations. Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm glad you came, and really, so because the first step of this is really knowing the capability of this tool. I'm just looking at the chat. I see Kevin asked, this data is based on the 2010 census and what other information sources? Were you referring specifically to
the demographics, like for instance, when you were talking about the communities, possible resettlement in areas, you've got like the demographic data with the races, maybe income levels and that. And as I remember, that those are the questions like for the 2010 census. And the 2020, of course, has been a political football. So is there any indication as to when that 2020 data might come in? Because I think a lot of that PolicyMap must be based upon 10-year-old data. I'm just guessing.
If it's census, yes, it would be, because the census is only every 10 years. That's a great question. I don't know the answer offhand to that. I'm sure they're working on it, but they also just unrolled their beta, so they've been quite busy with it. I imagine it's quite a lot of work to upload it, but I can only imagine that they're also working full steam ahead on this. PolicyMap is a small company too, so it's not one of those companies that has 1 million employees to do all their work for them.
That's a great tool. That's a great tool. Thanks for the demo. But I did want to mention that, what is the data and how old is it? I think is always a consideration in terms of how you go into planning, et cetera, et cetera.
And that's a great point, because you should always be aware of how old the data is, because it is a factor.
And Megan, I found out they still have not published the 2020 census results yet. They're still tabulating it. And it may be, Kevin, as you alluded to, it's a political football or a hot potato, actually. So those results aren't available to PolicyMap at this point.
Thank you, Barbara.
You're welcome.
And I noticed that they pull from all sorts of federal. They pull from the FBI. They pull from the census. If it's posted online, that's where they're pulling from.
I have another question to follow up with that, because that was a good point that was brought up. So what are your suggestions, like if you're making a presentation and, because of everything that's going on environmental wise, like how do you predict what could be the current state right now when you're using this data information?
That's a great question. My suggestion is that a lot of times they'll have multiple data points you can pull from. So while you may not be able to get data from 2020, you could at least show this is what it looked like 10 years ago, this is what it looked like 5 years ago. We predict that this pattern would only increase.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. It's not a perfect answer, but unfortunately we are limited by the data we can use.
I've got another question. I need to be educated, Megan, on the red line. What is that?
The red line was policies and laws where people who were white declined to approve loans for people who were Black in order to keep Black people living in certain areas, to keep Black peoples in the ghettos. So there were areas which were decided to be good areas, and they would only approve white people to have housing loans there. Right, it's discriminatory lending.
Yeah, basically, even if they had the same credit scores or similar income levels, they were still um, discriminated against in those aspects.
Mm-hmm. And I really think that if you're doing that type of research, this could be an extremely useful tool because you can see data. You can filter data by, put that red line lending up there, and then you can see modern data of, well, this is where people who are Black are still living. This is who's getting approved for loans right now.
You could see if food deserts exist in the former red line areas. You could see where hospitals are in the former red line areas. I mean, it just ended in 1940, so it's interesting research.
And I hate to say that Philadelphia was a prime example, the city of Philadelphia, of redlining in its history. So.
I actually looked at it, and I think the worst couple of cities was New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles. But you're welcome to look at this later on our own time too. Any other questions before our time ends here?
Here's one more. I'm glad that Mr. Bradford brought that up because I didn't know that. I'm sorry. Do you mind going over showing us how to do that again? How to access it?
Sure. Let me share my screen again. That's our PowerPoint. Okay. Let's see. So the specific thing that we're talking about, if you click on lending, under historic lending boundaries, this is what they call homeowners loan corporation risk management. And you'll only, at the time, Suwannee wasn't really part of the city. So I'm actually going to click off this. So all we'll see is just this single layer too. So if you look on a national level, we can actually see the big cities that were doing this. So there's New York, there's Boston, all these other areas. It's really sad. Did that answer your question? You can actually see, I'm going to zoom in. We have what was known as best. This is still desirable, definitely declining, and hazardous. So hazardous was the areas where Black people lived. So it kept Black people from not only moving into the desirable areas, but it also, they wouldn't necessarily, even if they wanted to buy a house within the Black areas, they wouldn't even necessarily approve a loan there.
And in your presentation earlier, you actually showed us the red line. Wasn't that what we saw earlier? It was like within the city or something. I'm not sure.
Let me go back to Atlanta. So this is actually what they called redlining, and they used it very visually here with actual red lines. But they're calling it homeowners loan corporation risk mass, but this is it's just another name for redlining.
Thank you so much, guys.
You're welcome. Any other questions? Okay. Well,